Hi, thank you for choosing In My Shoes. And today we are continuing our series on reentry, the penal system, and we have a very exciting guest today, Dr. Bernice Anderson. She's a licensed psychologist, and she's an expert on trauma and people and how and as we say, we always want to put a solution in. So she has some viable solutions to maybe addressing some of the trauma and the broken people, because we want to fix people as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Bernice Anderson. And Dr. Anderson, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I first would like to tell you how pleased I am to be here. And my major objective is to share things that I've learned from the other side of the fence, and my great, clear belief that the system in America has failed African Americans to such an extraordinary extent that I've practiced for 35 years, and I cannot help but note and wish to share ways that things could be improved, in addition to living my whole life in the ways that I could improve things. Because I come from a philosophy that's based in Judaism, which is called Tikkun Olam. And without those words, in translation, this is the philosophy, I think, behind all good, true religions. It means the world is broken. It is taken from the Kabbalah, which is the mysterious element that only people who have studied can study. Madonna didn't really become a Kabbalist. And what it says is, we are here, the world is broken, and our purpose here is to fix it. And depending where you are in the world, depends on how much effort you need to put into fixing. So if you have a lot of money, you might be able to take over schools and fix damages. If you have very little money, your job is to deal with every person you approach with respect and listening and doing what you can in terms of what life brings to you to make things better. If more people lived in accordance with whatever you might call it, Tikkun Olam, that would help in evolving a very poorly developed part of humanity, which gets less well developed as our society becomes more profit oriented. The greater the profit focus, the less the people focus. It's as simple as that. A choice has been made. There are many who believe this is the wrong choice, and there is a blindness both to the past, present, and future about the impact of this decision on many people who may be hearing this show, many people over 35 years that I have worked with whose potential and ability has been so damaged by systemic evils that it you would have to be blind, and many white people are blind, and many white people have no awareness of, just by being born with white skin, how the world is very different for them.
That's the white privilege.
That is white privilege. And I tried to get everything ready. I have data. Everything I say will be an opinion. Every fact I say has been vetted, and you can get this data that white privilege really implies the truth that white people are responsible for the sad situation for minorities in this country. And there is no person I would not say that to their face. Because while people like to blame the victim, there is so much evidence that is now coming to the forefront that the system maintains a level of poverty, a level of discrimination, a level of negative reactivity that influences black people regardless of their income status, and explains many questions white people have about, well, my forebears came and they did it, without any ability to recognize that the whole history of black people is so different. The needs are identical of all people, but the ways in which black people can achieve them have always involved fighting obstacles. And as they approach the middle class, I wanted to be a psychologist when I was 9 years old because I did not come from a very supportive family. There was a lot of psychological damage. And the good news is there is going to be a recognition of this psychological damage. There have been many studies that reflects the impact on children of being raised below a certain poverty line, in dysfunctional and chaotic families. This is going to be expressed in the new DSM-5. That is the book that psychologists and psychiatrists use to determine mental disorder. There was a woman who did studies with homosexual people when homosexuality was listed in one of the DSMs, I think it was DSM 3, as an illness. And she did studies that proved that homosexual people had exactly the same rate of mental disturbance as all other people, and that homosexuality by itself was not an illness. This was a tremendous change to remove that. What they've done that's positive, and there's lots of disagreement, is in the new DSM-5, they are finally beginning to integrate what and I don't have to tell black people, they already know, see as the misconstruing of systemic damage as the flaws of the victims. The issue is understanding and putting in the new DS5 the concept of chronic, ongoing childhood trauma.
Such as?
So, originally, trauma has been seen through soldiers as some traumatic, horrible, one-time event. What they know now, and they've done, and again, I can give data on all of the background, that children raised in neighborhoods where bullets are shooting through the rooms, and kids live with dysfunctional crack addict, addicted, brutal families, all of which relates the damage of their parents. They're not bad guys either. It goes down the generations. And these children have to be aware of their parents in one way or another. They have to be very careful, and they bring to school not only hunger or, the ways things are coped with on the lowest levels, being more violent, being more impulsive, because in these environments, which got created in Johnson's efforts, because he was a perfect civil rights guy, but the first bill he passed was a terrible mistake, in that what it did is it led to exactly the opposite, the things they complain about now, by not allowing women who were in relationships to men to collect money to feed their children.
But I don't think that was just Johnson's.
Oh, no.
He just kind of indemnified it more because it's always been, if you were on public assistance, you better not have a man anywhere near you. And they used to have investigators who came into the and looked in the closets
I
and
know.
looked under the beds. And this is way before Johnson. This was just how the system was to keep it. We have to remember that if black people, African American, whatever you want to call us, are thought of as less than, and we're supposed to stay below the surface and we should never achieve anything. So that's kind of how that whole, and I think he just made it in writing because it was never written anyplace. It was just kind of an untold truth that
No,
just
thank you, Hilda, because that's the truth of it. In his writing it, he solidified it so that it really, the outcome was that it's ironic because if they're for family values, all that had to be done is people who were in solid relationships would get a bonus. We would not have had so many unmarried people, women as heads of households. How they perpetuated it leads me to believe that it was related. I start out, oh, it's wonderful. I was younger. And then I began to realize that it really was set up for lack of success and for people to realize the only way they'd earn money is by having babies. This is a setup.
and if you think about it, it wasn't even getting the money because it was okay. Let's say in the late '60s, the early '70s, it was $43 every 2 weeks per child.
Yeah, I know they
You know,
talked like these people were
rolling in dough.
rolling into it was preposterous. And I have to tell you, in terms of, I was a pretty damaged kid in terms of this chronic kind of trauma. And in order to get out of that, you need support to realize that you are valuable and that the system is not set up to perpetuate this. And that writing led to generations of children who had no experience with anybody working. They'd never encountered it. So that what I call the surround skills for working, work ethic, and this is in school, not having to attend to problems at home, which I call the, and not I personally, but it's got this great term, the conflict-free severe of the ego. What that means is the part of your brain you take to school is not all clouded with who got beaten that morning, will mommy kill daddy, Do I have to wait on the steps when I come home? But that healthy children don't really attend to parents. The parents are the receivers of a gift, a child. Their job is to focus on their child. It's called, and the word, when you reach a point where you're able to put yourself on the back burner and focus and also model. Since so many people are damaged by the system, and the deepest is where is the invisible, the sense of who you are, the sense of what you can achieve is impacted, so that those skills, the surround skills, discipline, attention, obedience, the desire to learn, are all damaged in kids who come from environments where they weren't part of the family system, which that bill, which as I got made me more skeptical. It was like, Reconstruction was really Negro removal. How they would take where black people lived and make it all fancy, but in no way make provision for where the people who lived were going to live. They were put aside because they're necessary to the capitalist, the lowest
But
form.
it's still happening now.
Exactly.
It's happening. Have you been to Harlem lately?
Yes. Well, it's funny. When I go to Harlem, I have a very dear friend, and over the years, what my husband notes, because he's of the observant nature, is there are more white people than black people there, because again, the gentrification is those beautiful brownstones. White people are buying them, and that things change as things go in terms of where the people with the money find it cool or they want to live, but where the other people will live is never established, except that our system, which has we have 2% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prison population.
And 80% of those there
and 80% are minorities. This is such a setup that the rule is children are failed in schools because the real needs that they have are not addressed, which is for, like, I call it a benevolent dictatorship. Homes in schools where children's needs are met in relation to who the kid is, and they are provided, instead of providing more counselors, more psychologists, more family teachings, the system is removing them all. I work with teachers as patients. They are the feeling ones, have to be taught to do their thing and remove themselves, because I tell them to take notes. The districts are so out of compliance in New York State. They have not enough teachers. I had heard once upon a time the lottery was supposed to support education in New York City.
It was set up. It was passed and allowed to come about because those funds were supposed to be totally for education.
Yes.
And the bottom line is, those funds go into the general fund. So it's not only going for education, it's going for whatever else as well.
Well, that's
There's only
not
2 states in this country where the lottery is going strictly for education. Mississippi is one.
Okay.
So if you're living in Mississippi, you can go from pre-K through college at no cost.
And Mississippi, goddamn,
All
that's a
right.
good thing to
And
hear.
Mississippi was 49th when they started getting
Right.
the funding, and I think they've moved up to 30 something, the early 30s now.
We
And
look for progress, that's it,
but in New
because
York, it's not. There's no.
no,
And they even took away. They had a scholarship. Leaders of Tomorrow scholarship
yes,
gone, gone.
it's appalling. And you know, for those, the Emperor's New Clothes, that ancient story where the tailors come to town and the narcissistic king is sucked into they'll make the most beautiful clothes and they're weaving nothing. And everyone around the king doesn't want to say anything, and he's naked. And oh, we're trying this, we're gonna, fit this today. And he's stark naked, and the tailors, oh, they're just like today's politicians. They say, well, we've made this clothing so that only intelligent people can see it. So everybody's afraid to sound stupid. They don't trust themselves. And they're telling him how gorgeous he looks. And then the child, it's always the child, looks at him and says, but the emperor isn't wearing any clothes. He's just not yet been sucked in. He calls it. What so many people feel is true, I have to say, I'm on board, that the lack of self-esteem and self-worth in black children and minority children is devastating, because their capacity to learn is damaged. Not that they started out stupid, but every child is born with potential, and the first 5 years are the foundation. I am a big follower of Erik Erikson, and again, you can get information, who had a theory about the task of each year of life to prepare you to go to school. And how kids are raised determines whether there are holes in that foundation. So if the first year he lays it out, the task of the child is to develop trust or mistrust in the world. If the child, and people really believe that they carry ideas from other places, that kid has ability to think, they just don't. They should never be left crying. They should be held and coddled, and so that their sense, oh, life's not bad out here, leads to their second year, which is the challenge is developing autonomy. I am a separate person, and they demonstrate that by saying no while they're holding out their, do you want juice? No. And there's the cup. That it's their way of saying, I'm not you, I am me. And it's mostly reflected in the toilet training thing. If you allow this as a present, because poops are presents from kids, after you've nurtured them in the first year, they're all grandiose. That's when it's needed. By 2, they need to feel a sense that they can give. It is a present to you, which is why training them with rewards for doing what you like, all kids want to please parents, and giving them some push in it rather than the rigidities. It should be by this age or this age. If they come out autonomous, they have a sense of self. That leads to 3-year-olds a sense of initiative. That's when they're getting into everything. And wise parents, our goal is to guide who our child is into areas where their interests can be worked on. No, we will not write on the walls, but we do not punish them. We show them where they can write. So we form an outlet. and they're like all inquisitive, and what's this and what's that. If that's handled with understanding and children are seen as people, which is something many people do not do, they'll come out being industrious, which means they are ready for school. When they hit school, from about 5 to 11, it's called the latency age, and their whole job is mastery. That's why they're big on rules. That's why they're big on, they want to learn, and they'll come home and tell you, no, the teacher said, you better not fight with the teacher, because they're learning things and mastering skills. And then when they hit adolescence, all of the early feelings about that foundation come back, so we get a second chance. Many African American people in this country carry what has been termed post-traumatic slavery disorder. Now, I had thought there was only one person who did this. I have her tape, but I discovered many people have written on this. And what it relates to are the kinds of things that people carry down the generations. They don't know why they do them, but in the history of the unwelcome voyage, the passage, people had to respond a certain way in slavery to keep their children safe. For example, women had to, there was a lot of physical punishment towards their sons to keep them from their natural wish to respond to being treated badly. And for slavery, I believe, didn't end till 1964 when they passed the Equal Rights Amendment.
Slavery is still in existence.
Now, prejudice is still in existence.
No, slavery is still in existence in this country.
It definitely is, because it only ended in 64 in a legal way.
No, because if you read the 13th Amendment, it says that the only way that there can be slavery in this country is if you're convicted. So we go.
Okay.
So we have the cradle to the prison pipeline, and that's where the slavery is.
No, you're right, and that's because it's profitable. Hilda is working, I know, with prisons. I have all of this data about the miseries, and some guy I heard on, I was privileged to hear Hilda on The Struggle Continues.
Yes.
And some person called in, and you could tell this show is serving as a model, like the Black Muslims did in jails, to help people come to peace. I did not approve of all of the behaviors of the Black Muslims, but this was a gift to have people feel they are valuable, and if they are treated badly, it's what I call attribution, and I work with patients. Who's crazy here? Do you want to act or do you want to react? And if you find somebody's a fool, you're not obligated. If you're walking to school and somebody see you walking, they say your mother, they are impelled to drop their book bag and not actively pursue what's good for them, but to go beat that kid up. For a long time, smart was equated with wanting to be white. The things that were taken from Black kids that they're trying to put back now, and I hear Joe, and he's saying these things, it's like a Sermon on the Mount to me. He is, by having people who went through it and who end up saying, don't get arrested in America. And what he pointed out that hadn't been so clear to me, it's like, things are, and then it came together, that you never pay your debt to society. This guy was so articulate that because of the consequences that come with you, you can't vote, jobs won't hire you, you're
Well,
never done,
but
even
you
if you've
but you
paid.
can vote once you have completed all of your sentence, and if you're on parole, completed parole. That's what the Unlock the Box movement was about.
Okay, so
So that
you're
you can
teaching me. I'm
you
so
can vote.
pleased to hear that you can vote.
Even
When
if you
I
have a
came
felony,
up,
you couldn't. But
you
that was the
see, I'm trying to keep up with the changes, and some of them are very good. The old stuff remains. The Supreme Court gutted the voting rights bill. Obama, our president, has to stuff that court with Democrats. Ideas were given to let people retire before they're ancient so that the new progressive justices will be around a while, because as the court is now, it's always 5 to 9s, and it is with people who are not doing service.
was sleeping.
Well, they're not sleeping, or there are even black people on the court who hate black people.
No, I'm not saying sleeping like a sleep or sleep. I'm saying it's like their eyes are shut to reality.
Reality. And
not,
it's generally those rigid people. My belief, I mean, if we look at, they all go about the Constitution, that it was so clearly a document in progress, like an IEP that's an individual educational plan for a kid, is supposed to be a working document. It's not done and finished. You keep adding. If you achieve this, you put more. The Constitution required so much compromise. People who were not racist and for abolition had to tolerate the inclusion of black people as 3/4 of a person. Their ability to...
3/5 of a man.
3/5, you're right. I get the little
3/5 of a man.
details, but the concept was so outrageous that people who would have never... This was wisdom. They had forbearing. They just wanted it going. And over time, through the amendments to the Constitution, it clearly tells you the brilliance of it is it can be applied to the current situation. It's not in black and white. And it is so misread in its literal interpretation. These people didn't know what was coming, but this document is set up as a working document considering the compromises that went into having it, and then the need for changes. Some, like prohibition, were a disaster. Others can have great significance. You know, women's rights, civil rights, a whole variety, but that's just indicative. The people who wrote it, there was, if you read about it, battles all the time between Hamilton, who was the Federalist, we should have a strong government, and Thomas Paine, who believed the average guy could do it, and he had the wisdom. And this all worked within a very small sphere. We are enormous now. We are so many people. And it doesn't work. You can't have little town hall victories. But this wonderful thing has happened. I'm from the 60s, and I could march, and I could vote. And the computer has now provided an opportunity for those who followed, you know, John Mayer's song, like, we're waiting on the world to change. The world has changed, and it is now. And anybody with a computer or a smartphone can become involved at no cost in signing petitions for issues that are personal to them. I I have a long list I go through during the day. There are these groups: Credo, American Civil Liberties Union, the people who are working towards raising the minimum wage. And their strength lies in people realizing I can count now. For so long, it's been felt it's pointless. So it is perfectly reasonable, as he says in the song, it's waiting on the world to change. And one day, our generation, it's here. I have a million sites I would be happy to share. You can find your own. You can start your own petition.
Yeah, there's the petition out now, and I always found that it was amazing that there's a national movement toward stopping police brutality.
That's right.
And
all the stuff that matters. And I guess I get really excited because I have, I try to get some stuff together about various things where they say, we won, we did it. And what did it was the people in government's job is to keep their job. If their constituents let them know they don't want a certain bill or they want a certain bill, the time has now come, I think, for African Americans who, if you have a smartphone or a computer, to get right in the mix. In a way, I can't be marching anymore, but I can go back to the rights that I fought for in the 60s, picketing Woolworths and Denny's, and now they're all, oh, welcome, and they show black families. Things can change, and people can help change it by becoming invested. The time is now. What are they doing there? I can say something, and I can change it. And if there's a particular thing like curb, I know for Hilda, one of her major issues is the lack of respect for the curb cuts for handicapped people. People who share this can start their own petition in their neighborhoods. Your representatives get this, and they look, and I guess my bottom line whenever I read comments is, don't vote for anybody who's not working in your best interest.
It wasn't necessarily the curb cuts because the city is pretty much in compliance with the curb
Well,
cuts.
thank God. I remember a while when it wasn't.
Right, and then
things changed.
Then they spent our money and put it in wrong, and then had to redo every one of them. Now the problem is sanitation.
Exactly.
And when the snow comes, they plow the snow in front of the curb cuts, so you can't get off.
No, this is it, and it was always like that. The city was consistently a place where people moved in. The world was such that you could do better. You could have an apple cart, and then you could have a little Apple store, and people, the American dream can work. It worked for me. The major difference, which nobody wants to recognize, is that the circumstances of African American people who didn't come here because they had the risk gene that brought lots of people to America, they were not wanting to come. They had really no ability to do what other groups could do. Change their name, fix their nose.
Change the color.
Like that's where the line stopped.
You can't change the color.
And that prejudice has led many white people and among African American populations within it themselves to just stop at the surface and not know or look, there is a person in there. Stereotypes are necessary because our need cognitively is to place people. But the secret is, if you have an idea and the data doesn't fit, the idea has to go. It's like, oh, look, not all black people, blah, blah, so that you learn if someone's a wretch, because there are truths to all stereotypes, except they exist in every single group. I was working with a colleague. I've done human service all my life. It's my mission. I worked in the world. I learned nothing. But my focus was on the kids, and this guy and I were going to put on a skit in terms of all of the stereotypic behaviors: drunkenness, laziness, cheapness, blah, 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 within every ethnic group, because it exists. It's just shown in the way of that group, and it doesn't belong to any group. The depth of prejudice can come from traumatic early experience, or like in Valley High in South Pacific, you've got to be taught. Kids pick up. So there's two ways to change it. One of the busing was a bad idea. But one of the pluses is if you get to be with people, there's two ways to change it. One is inside, and people always go on experience. And the other is to be forced to be with other people so that you get to see this. She's really nice. Her skin is black. So that parents who are teaching, and this is what we're looking for, that these things don't matter, have to follow through by living lives that permit this. I lived in the tenements of the Bronx. I didn't even know I was poor because it was before television. And television is a profound reflector and creator of culture.
Yes.
So before television, you had your neighborhood, and there is a certain line of poverty and lack of essentials that children need that will always be damaging. But we didn't know we were poor because we had what everybody else in the neighborhood had. And at that point, television, if you remember, or know people, go Ralph Cramden, and like Amos and Andy were so classic. There was a black actress who was criticized for taking jobs as a maid. She said, I'd rather have a job as a maid and get paid than be a maid, because it was so limited. I went to the New School for Social Research for my doctorate, and I literally worked with people with PhDs who drove cabs. There just wasn't any room, and that comes from that flatness. The civil rights movement made it not illegal, but the inner response to people. Now that profit is all we worship, everyone's money is good. Certainly in globalization, the very wealthy people of every color is no issue. Everything's on money. But everything else has been set up by the system to have the people at the bottom have to compete for jobs. So they've created racial hatreds that really are like the puppet masters are making blacks and Irish and Italians and Jews. They all have to hate each other because the guys up there get their money. There is a need for a lower class in capitalism. The evil of this is not very publicized. And they're always too quick to blame. Like, how come black kids still do more poorly, even if they're in the middle class? And the response always relates to me to, I see friends, they have sons. Their sons walk down the street, somebody makes a look. This goes to our gut, to live in America in a racial society like this is going to damage you. Unless, well, it will always be an injury, but how damaged you are has to do with the process of attribution. Who's crazy here? If people are really ignorant, you don't have to be reactive. You can know this is an idiot and follow your footsteps because now it's available. After World War II, when they gave out all the monies for the soldiers to go to school, it was deliberately withheld from black people. There are hundreds of stories which black people well may know, but the good news, there are more and more articles on this in the New York Times. Once it makes the New York Times, what it's saying, it's becoming mainstream. And more people are writing about the inequality. There's this whole series in the Times, The Two Americas. It's like, and very clearly speaking about these differences. Like at the beginning, black people were very hostile towards other black people who did well, because they were going to be left behind. This is what they created. It wasn't glorious. They were left there. Now there are more people, there has been change, who, the original ones, it is very hard to be a representative of your race and also a human being.
Yes, you hit it, because I remember when I was going to college, I mean, nobody in my family had gone before, and it was, you think you're better than us. And
Yes.
no, I'm
Yeah,
different.
they weren't supporting other cultures. I was the first in my family. We were the Ellis Island Jewish, Italian, Irish crowd, and the goal was that you could do better, and that was the parental push. But since learning was so prohibited during slavery, there has always been a desire for education, but the unfortunate connection in the streets, which was an alternative, perfectly entrepreneurial capitalist system of a, sideline drugs, because they couldn't get into the other stuff. And I watch shows, and I know there's shows, and The Wire was a profoundly influential show, where as soon as these people had gotten enough money, they hired lawyers and became legal. Therefore, they joined the founders of our country, Rockefeller, the Pinkertons, all of these people we extol who have all these things started as crooks and thieves, and somehow it's different. The more we could see how it was so similar, that this is what ultimately was the goal of the dealers. They created a role of work. And these kids who can't learn anything in school will tell you to the penny what you owe when their skills are put with their necessary tasks, their sharpest tasks. And this is why they say the tests are not fair, and they keep trying to their credit, make them more race blind or poverty blind, because they would have questions about things that many people never saw in their lives.
Exactly.
This deprivation was not their fault.
But don't you remember Dick, Jane, and Sally?
Of course, I have them on my refrigerator.
Okay, so I mean, then they. I mean, I think in the early '70s they came up with In the City,
Yes.
to kind of take away from the suburbs when you live in the city and you're in urban.
Exactly.
But who's making the tests?
Well, this
They
is
don't
what
have the input from the people that they're testing.
Well, always. Everything. I worked at Blythedale. I see everything that they do. They needed to expand the nursing station. They had a committee, not one nurse. So, of course, they made it too small for the bed and without the sink. When they opened up education for all disabled children, it was a gold mine at the beginning in that they had rules for preschool psychologists. Now, one psychologist was on. It is classic. Don't even ask me why. Logic and truth will set you free. So I was part of a group that published these rules for people. I was working on Long Island at that time, that there was plenty of money to catch kids who wouldn't fall in the cracks. There was tremendous family involvement. The world has changed. The schools are a nightmare. The parents are, everybody loves their kids, and everyone does the best they can. And if people are not treating their children appropriately, they may be following old dictates. They don't even know why. I've read, like, in this, post-traumatic slave syndrome. You go in a bank and all the white kids are running around and those black kids are standing right by their mothers. This comes from an old carried on idea. And I lived in Co-op City because I moved there because I wished to raise my family in an integrated community in terms of what had always been important to me. I would send my kids out in the morning and the clothing was clean, if not, and then I'd dump them in the tub at night. But my friends, I would sit there. Their kids had to sit through the hair grooming, and they had to stay clean like bandboxes all day long because of that old fear that if their kid is dirty, it will reflect that they are a dirty person. The impact of this on self-esteem, I escaped this through white privilege, meaning it worked for me because I could pass as anything. It's all luck. The American dream, and they had City College then, which was free. They called it the Harvard of the poor. I was grateful my parents didn't need my income, but I worked with Dr. Kenneth Clark, who did the studies for the 1954, the studies were essential to the anti-segregation of schooling, because he did a study with dolls and he had black kids and white kids, and inevitably the black kids chose the white dolls. To my great sorrow, this powerful information, this study was replicated about 2 years ago, and the results had not changed.
And they're not going to change until this society
Well,
has changed.
that's why.
And there's not a whole lot that we can do about it on a whole. But we're trying to do it one person at a time.
Right, but we can do it more on a whole by, I'm telling you, I discovered this, and I just want to share it, that I could sit at my computer and I can vote for exactly the kinds of laws I want: raising the minimum wage, equal education, more people in the schools to deal with children who come their most significant need. It's like with autism. Kids who are bright, they'll get them through, but their true needs, the law says that you have to provide for the needs of the child. If they're not academic, we are still too unsophisticated, which I hope is changing by these articles, and the change that these kids have different needs because their experience is different. They need other things to be successful. Lots of support.
We're talking decades down the road.
Maybe.
Just based on the Department of Education. I worked with them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can come up with a wonderful idea. You can come up with a wonderful program. And by the time it's implemented, it doesn't look anything like.
This is so true.
And you're sitting there going, huh?
Right.
Oh, no, that's not real. That's not, you misinterpreted what I was saying, and it wasn't. It was, we're going to keep the status quo.
Right.
We're going to keep the status quo.
Right.
And there's not a hell of a lot that you're going to be able to do to change that. And even signing petitions, it's still down the road. And in the meantime, our kids are suffering.
This is the truth.
Our kids are suffering.
And I cannot, you see, that's it. This is the part that for people of awareness is like heart crunching. But it's a way I've discovered, because if they don't do it, they don't give up. These people are like bulldogs in terms of following them, and they want to like pass a bill but put this codicil on, and then there'll be 15 more petitions. And remember, all these people are either given their jobs or elected, and the first thing is to be elected. So if they're going to choose systems that don't address these, petitions are very specific. And as I said, you can join them. You can start your own credo.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you off now because we're running out of time.
Yes.
I want to let you know that we appreciate your input. I want to thank you again for choosing In My Shoes. We see what it's like to be in your shoes, Dr. Anderson. And you kind of felt how we've been feeling all along. This series is going to continue until we get to the bottom of it, I hope. I hope that we can at least if we make a difference in one person at a time, that's fine too, because that person is going to pay it forward.
This is my hope. It is a pleasure. It's like a fantasy to me, because the people I know, they're my choir. The people you can't talk to, you can't talk to. If people have a set idea, they will push away information rather than a healthy person who says, this information doesn't fit my belief. It's my belief that has to go. And, I have such a history. I really am delighted to just say the time has come. I'm doing this.
All right. That's it. We're done.
Thank
we're done
you.
for today.
Thank you.
But we're not done.
No.
We're going to continue fighting the fight as activists always do.
Right. And please, if people want names of places, they could call you.
Okay. Thank you for choosing In My Shoes. And the contact information is going to be provided for you. And hope to see you soon.